Great. So it's 2 p.m. Shall we? I think most of the people are here. Shall we start? Welcome, everyone. Welcome all dear ISCET members to the actually the 9th committee meeting. We have an agenda today with like 2 main topics, and of course an open invitation for like at the end as time permits for any suggestions, and we always value your opinions. I just don't see Gemma. Is Gemma here? We have the main topics is like the survey committee has now some results to present by Gemma, but we will wait for her to do that. I don't think she's here yet. And also, we would like to start speaking about integrating eye trackers in our routine life and the practicalities for that. And actually, Matt um, will be actually wants to speak about that, and also we interchange our opinions. But I don't know if we would if you don't mind waiting like for 5 minutes or something for Gemma to and others also to join, because I keep on seeing people coming in, which is great. We can start like by just like soft intro, because this like today like March 26th. Actually, March 2023 was our first meeting, where actually, yeah. So it's kind of like so we should be somehow celebrating that in a way, and it would have been nice to have like a presentation for the milestones, but actually we have now this is, I see it like it's an established committee. We in all our meetings we're there and we're meeting and we're sharing ideas, which is amazing for the whole last period. And we have now our website. Matt also facilitated that. We have introduced the society, and we're introducing it. We have publication at least also stating that we noticed this gap, and that's why we're here. And today we're going to discuss, once Gemma joins the survey, which will actually I think it's nice that today is and today we will be starting actually speaking about the results of the survey, and therefore the start of working on what we all wanted, to pick this specialty, one specialty, and work on it and have standards, and then like start from there to other specialities. And like we still also want to discuss maybe membership, other topics, but I just I'm trying to keep focused to the main 2 topics, but I think we have like pretty good well-established milestones over there. And of course, open the mic whenever you want to comment. Like, we still are in our soft intro for this meeting. Okay, just I see everyone is here. I see Gemma also joined, and that's the first topic on our agenda. And I would just give Gemma the mic if she would like to just start discussing the survey results.
Hi, Rasha. Hi, everyone. I've got a couple of slides, if it's okay, just to kind of share, just to help me
Perfect.
talk my way through. Let me just... it's just... So can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, lovely. Are they in the right format? They've gone in a slightly weird format here, but can you see them?
We see them well.
We see the presenter view.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're in
Okay.
presenter view. That's all, Gemma.
Okay.
It looks like you can swap them in that display settings button.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. That's probably a little bit better.
Yeah.
So hi everyone. My name's Gemma Arblaster. I am an orthoptist based in Sheffield in the UK, but I'm presenting some results from a survey we've done, as Rasha's introduced. But there's been a group of people working on this, so this is not me on my own. This is a large group of us who have kind of taken forward a lot of the ideas of some earlier ISCET discussions, talked about how we might gather information to kind of guide our next piece of work. So what we did as a group, let's see if I can get my slides to move. So as Rasha described, the ISCET was very keen to concentrate its efforts where the efforts were needed most. And so rather than make decisions on what we felt people wanted, which was clinical guidelines or standards for eye tracking, we decided that we should kind of survey people internationally who were actually doing kind of clinical eye tracking, because we were struggling to find information available in the literature to help guide this. So this was a piece of work that we got ethical approval for via the University of Sheffield, where I'm based. And the idea was that we wanted to try and find out who was eye tracking internationally, explore whether there was a need or a desire from people doing this for guidelines to be developed. And we asked for information, but we asked for this specifically on kind of clinical eye tracker use, not in humans, and not for research. So the survey is still actually open. We've had the odd response come in over the last couple of months, but this is very much kind of dried up. So we feel like the survey is complete. This has been open since late October of last year, and we tried to distribute this quite widely through our different networks. Some preliminary data was presented to ISCET back in December, and that kind of was another push on survey completion. And the idea for today is to present the results as far as we've got to you. And these are the main things that we feel we would like the ISCET group to discuss. Or try and answer, is there a reported lack of or a need for clinical guidance or standards for eye tracking clinically? If there are there aspects that should be prioritised, either a guideline or a standard, or maybe it's a clinical condition or a clinical discipline that requires prioritising? And if we make some decisions on that, does ISCET collectively have the expertise to do this at present, and how would be best to take that forward? And what we've discussed in the past is having working groups or subcommittees that might branch off and work on different aspects of these guidelines. So far we've had 123 responses to the survey. That meant all had read the information and given consent for their responses to be used by ISCET. We had full responses. So what that meant is they'd accessed the survey and they'd progressed all the way through to the end, from 44 of those. But there are a large number who gave kind of partial responses. Some of those partial responses are actually very detailed. Some gave no response at all, and some just gave one response to the initial question and then no more. What the working group have had some discussion on is, what data do you remove, if any, and how we best report the data that's incomplete to make sure we're kind of fully characterising the respondents, but also the non-responders to the survey. So we've had a bit of discussion on that point already. So this is an overview of those with sufficient information to report it to you today. What we wanted to ensure was that we've got a broad range of responses, and we feel like we've covered different groups of users sufficiently. So the majority of people that gave this information reported that they were themselves performing eye tracking clinically and interpreting the results. A small number were answering the survey, but they were kind of using it not fully in that capacity, but partially. We had some responses from people involved with a professional body, and those that gave that information are listed here. We also had responses from people who were involved with manufacturers, and those that gave that information are listed here. And then we had some other. That was quite poorly characterised, so it's quite difficult to give you lots of detail on that other, but we did have some other responses. So for those that reported what eye tracker they used, we had lots of different types of eye trackers reported. And whilst that's probably not a surprise, I do think that's worth highlighting at this early stage, because if we're talking about developing guidelines, we've actually got a lot of people using lots of very different types of equipment. And in terms of who this group of people are, the majority of respondents who gave their profession or their kind of clinical discipline were medically trained doctors, either in the field of neurology, ophthalmology, neuro-ophthalmology or ENT. We did have other responses. We had quite a lot of responses from orthoptists, a couple from optometrists, the audiologist, a few from clinical scientists, and a few had commented that they weren't clinical themselves. They were a researcher, but they were working with clinicians. So even though they were a researcher by background, they were doing eye tracking in this clinical capacity. So just wanted to highlight some responses from the manufacturers themselves to begin with. We did ask what guidelines or what kind of advice or support they were providing to their users, and this was these results are quite descriptive. The majority said they gave advice or information on the limits of interpretation. Some commented that actually that was company specific information or that was confidential, but a few did highlight that they provided user manuals or information on practical setup of equipment. And I think one or two said they gave case examples or clinical examples where their eye trackers had been used in a clinical scenario, but just kind of individual case examples. We did also ask manufacturers if they were aware of their users having any concerns or issues. And some of these were quite practical, relating to things like patient setup and how their equipment might be integrated with other clinical information or other recordings. But there's quite a lot about interpretation and analysis of data. They also did add that there were user concerns or comments about questions about how reliable the information was relating to make a diagnosis, users not always fully understanding the clinical value of the results, issues around the capability or the reliability of eye tracking in a clinical population, and how users might validate the results gained compared to other tests they might perform. There were also a number of reports from manufacturers about devices not necessarily being clinically or not having the regulatory approvals for their devices to be used in a clinical or a diagnostic capacity. So some of the manufacturers seemed to have that regulation, and others highlighted specifically that their devices were not meant for diagnostic purposes. So again, I think this is worth highlighting when we come to talk about what next. This is something that manufacturers have highlighted, and I'm sure some of us in the group are quite aware of these debates and discussions as well. So when we move on to more users, so not manufacturers, but users of clinical eye trackers. The majority said that they did not have guidelines existing at present. A number said they did, and quite a number of them actually cited the previous work done by the ISCET group, or the eye tracking group that ISCET has come out of. But this was meant as a research piece of work, but it's clearly been picked up or is being used to apply that to a clinical scenario. A couple commented that they had an institutional guideline, but a lot said if they had it, it was either from manufacturers or they were looking at research evidence and trying to apply that to clinical populations. The overwhelming response to these questions were that they did not have guidelines, or that guidelines they had were insufficient to be useful, and that guidelines, standards, recommendations, people use lots of different terminology, would be positive and welcomed. So there did seem to be quite an overwhelming consensus to that question. Oh, sorry, gone backwards, not forwards. So in terms of what is needed, we did ask, if you have guidelines and they're not sufficient, where do you feel this could be made better? Or where it is lacking, what do you feel is needed? And there's a couple of slides on this because there were lots and lots of different responses. So again, this data is quite descriptive at this point. And it's roughly broken up into the practical aspect and the analysis of the results. So in terms of kind of testing, there were comments about needing best practice descriptions or standardized testing protocols, information about calibration and kind of minimum testing procedures that should be performed. But then there were also lots of comments about needing guidance for reporting and analysis. Additional things that came out were things like handling quite specific testing conditions, or how clinically to control for different things. So things like monocular, binocular tracking, or controlling for accommodation whilst you're recording eye movements. And comments about needing guidelines for pediatric testing as well as adult testing, and what happens when cooperation is less than optimal. How to do this quickly but yet robustly if the patient is a small child. So there were kind of asks for minimum procedures, minimum equipment requirements, how to test, when to test. And there were lots of comments about the lack of normative data, or data on when is what I'm seeing normal and when is what I'm seeing abnormal. The other thing related to the practicality of testing were comments about precision and error, what affects data quality in a clinical population, particularly talking about things like pupil abnormalities or iris abnormalities. If what we're tracking is the pupil, what affects the quality of the data I'm getting out of the eye tracker. There were also comments about being aware that whatever is produced or aimed to be produced by ISCET needs to fit with other standards and regulations. So there are other standards for things like medical devices, but also for reporting and things like software for diagnostic use. In addition, I've kind of put these on a separate slide. There were lots of more kind of clinical scenarios where people were talking about what they felt is needed. The majority were talking about eye movement systems or neurological conditions. So there was, the majority of the responses were about guidelines for eye tracking and recording different eye movements. So saccade, smooth pursuit, VOR, vergence, fixation. There's quite a lot of call for nystagmus. That was probably one of the more requested conditions. Other people did comment on things like perimetry, pupillometry, and other visual functions. So I think the work of ISCET going forward is not only to consider what we need to develop, but making sure that other guidelines don't already exist for some of these things already. So I'm thinking particularly here about pupillometry, where I think we've had discussions before that this may be covered elsewhere. So yes, whilst we need to be aware people are asking for these clinical conditions or clinical testing setups, we need to be aware that some of that might be picked up elsewhere. There was some mention of kind of other more kind of executive function type work. Other clinical conditions included things like cranial nerve palsies, or how to adjust testing when there is a clinical condition. So how to adapt our testing. So how do we record eye movements when there is poor vision, or when there is strabismus, or when there is ocular pathology like that may affect a result. And then there were a long list of neurological conditions also listed. So you name it, it was pretty much in the results. There was a long list of very different requests. So just to bring that back to the aim of presenting the results back to ISCET, I think for the first aim, or the first question, is there a reported lack of and a need for clinical guidance? I think the results overwhelmingly suggest there is a lack and there is a need of users of clinical eye tracking for guidance, standards, protocols, minimum testing procedures. Are there guidelines and standards that should be prioritised? The technical use of eye tracker was broadly separated into the using of the equipment, the setup, the how do I actually do this? But there was a lot on, and what do I do with the results? How do I analyze these, and what do I compare my results to? In terms of clinical conditions and disciplines, ocular-wise, nystagmus came out quite strongly, but also just how to standardize that testing of different eye movements. And there were a number of neurological conditions that came out from the neurology community. So for further discussion with the group is how we go forward with this and what we do next. So thank you very much. That's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm sure there will be lots of questions from everybody, but I will stop sharing for now.
Thank you, Gemma, for such a comprehensive feedback for all of us. And I just want to comment that it's really fruitful, because when you are stating what the people in the asked, and I was just looking into our own aim for the society, and they kind of overlap, and we already assumed this gap, and when we presented our not assumed, I mean, we did know that there is a gap, and we're happy that we put our hands into it, and we introduced the society, and when we see the aims, actually was already to provide normalized data, and to have the standards and reference, and we even took it further to conditions, which what we have seen from people, the feedback. And if I can have just like a quick comment, and then it's everyone's chance to comment. I think nystagmus, it's one of the biggest challenges with eye trackers, because they're not not all the manufacturers. I mean, not all the current eye trackers are able to deal with that, and I would put that under the challenges actually for us as clinicians. And on top of it seems to be nystagmus, and I'm happy that people also brought up people with low vision. So that's a category. And I noticed there's ophthalmologist and the neuro-ophthalmologist, which I think they both are under kind of ophthalmology subspecialty, but it was very nice. I think, like, I don't want to jump into the conclusions, but it's obvious, like, that most of the needs according to the survey is kind of pointing to ophthalmology and optometry in this field. However, of course, it's everyone else's comments now.
Matt.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. That's been really, really helpful. And actually, I'm surprised too just how closely that aligns with, what we had presumed from the start. I really thought we must be missing some, some field out there that's just not aware of us. So that's really useful, really. And also, obviously, we do have, if nystagmus is obviously something where there's a lot of expertise in the group already. Again, I really didn't think that would be the one that would come out on top, but it seems to be. But I wanted to go back to your point about people asking about guidelines for specific eye movement types, so saccades and pursuit and so on. Have we just lost Gemma? No, she's still there. It's just focused on you. Okay. Yeah. Was that in relation to particular conditions? Because obviously testing saccades is going to be done in a number of different ways based on the condition. When people said, I'd like to have a protocol for testing saccades, was that generally in relation to a particular condition, or was it just a more general question?
So often it came out quite generally that they just listed, different eye movements. Some then went on to say required for neurology assessment. So I think clinically, neurologists and ophthalmologists and kind of other people under those umbrellas testing those patients are probably testing these and observing them visually anyway as part of their kind of workup. It's probably part of their standard testing battery. So it was just a list of these, sometimes related to neurological conditions.
Right, that's interesting. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in a way, I do wonder if that's where we start. We start with, this is how you do it. And then what follows from that is, and this would be a normal result, and this would be an abnormal result.
I guess because we previously assumed that we would work condition by condition, and we'd have subcommittees working, who have particular expertise in, for example, Parkinson's or Huntington's or something like that, rather than saying, hey, here's a general test for saccades, and there's many different ways that can go depending on what you're interested in. So we may need to just rethink how we will structure different standards, whether they would be by condition or whether there would be kind of a general suite of testing for eye movements in general.
Yeah, I guess John Erickson.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to say, I did want to say something, but continue the discussion you're having at the moment. I wanted to bring up a few points that have occurred to me having watched your presentation.
Yeah. I guess what I was going to say in response to Matt is I've been slightly surprised by some of the asks for some of the probably the basics. And I guess that probably means that people appreciate you've got to do the fundamental things well to get good data out. You've got to set it up right. You've got to calibrate it right. You've got to be able to test these eye movements before we start making kind of clinical interpretations of that. So maybe go back to Matt's point about how we structure it, maybe that fundamental piece of work first, and then the going off into more clinical conditions, because these are people using it but asking for specific, there's a comment I'm looking at on the screen, specific protocols to ensure we're doing the right thing. People are obviously doing what they think is right, but are hoping that protocols and standard or guidelines come out for them to probably benchmark what they're doing against that to reassure their clinical interpretation. John, I'll go back to you. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. Really helpful presentation, but it did raise it seems first of all, I missed the previous couple of meetings, so my apologies for that because of scheduling problems. But it seems to me, if I put together several things you said, a lot of these eye trackers are not certified for clinical use. There is a huge diversity of these instruments. And the question of a normative database is going to be specific to a particular instrument and not just the protocol. So basically, I think one of the big challenges here, to the extent that you want to roll this out clinically, is generating a normative database is not trivial, as everyone here knows. And you may be faced with the prospect of having to create such databases for more than one instrument. But is there any point in doing that if the instrument can't be used clinically legally? So I think I'm stating the obvious. I'm sure a lot of this has occurred to people, but it just seems to me that this is the kind of elephant in the room in terms of not only how we do something, but with what do we do it? That was just my comment.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Ruth.
Hi, Gemma. Great presentation. That was so interesting. I've got just two general points to make, and sorry to pin everything back to ISEF, but that's where I'm comfortable. Reference data, John, you're absolutely right, is a really important point. And I think in ISEF, we probably wasted the best part of 40 plus years telling everybody you have to get reference data for your own lab and for every different instrument that there is out there. And in fact, the opposite happens when you implement standards. What happens is that techniques converge in such a way that, in fact, individual instrument reference data should not be necessary. Now, it might be, and obviously this has to be undertaken with a great deal of care. Colleagues in the clinical chemistry labs do this so much better than us, because they tell you how you're able to transform someone else's reference data to be safe to use in your own population. And we've started to take that on board in ISEF. How do you approach someone else's reference data set and implement it safely in your own clinic? And it's very successful. So I guess my first point is a plea to try and prioritize from the outset, whenever you can, to avoid this ghastly sentence which crops up in our standards still, although not the newer ones, that says each centre must develop its own reference data, because what that does is slam the door of the test in the face of anybody who wants to start trying to use it, and it may not be necessary. The other thing, I'll put my hand down, sorry. The other thing I was going to say was that this, again, modelling on ISEF standards, so you probably all are aware that we have a standard for each one of our tests, and I don't think eye tracking really works in the same way. It may be that ISET needs a standard, as in a sort of recipe how to do it for different things, like for well, you listed them all already, Gemma, rather than coming at it from a clinical condition point of view. And then we have an overarching documentation which we call the ISEF Guide to Visual Electrodiagnostic Procedures. And its role is to say, well, if you're interested in this condition, do this combination of tests. And if you're interested in this condition, do this combination of tests. And I think maybe that gets round the idea that you say, here is the test to look at nystagmus. And nystagmus is a bit of a no-brainer, I guess, because it is more obvious what you would need to do. But if you were working someone up for nystagmus, it would probably make a lot of sense to check what their accommodation work and all sorts of other things as well, which could all be done with eye tracking. So that was the second point.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. I think that's really helpful, because essentially, if somebody's been there, seen it, done it in their own discipline, and there's lessons to be learned from what somebody else has experienced, there's no point making those same time-consuming decisions. Larry.
Oh, hi. I've been absent from a number of these. and I actually managed not ever to get the link to the survey. So I can still be one of the last respondents. I wanted to comment in particular on nystagmus, in that I think there's quite a range of what we can do, but what my experience of doing both research and clinical recordings is what we do as researchers is often quite different from what clinicians want. And my work has generally found clinicians want, if you will, descriptive information rather than quantification. They want to know where the null, first of all, is it infantile? Is it latent, manifest, latent? Is it acquired? Where's the null? Is there a latent component? But it's also possible, as Matt certainly knows, to provide very detailed quantification of foveation. And similarly, I think in saccades, there's a lot of quantification we can do that cuts across disorders. Things like gain, hypometria, hypermetria, excuse me, internuclear ophthalmoplegias. So I think some of these would lend themselves to being defined quite well. Others, like clinical recordings for nystagmus, are vaguer in the sense that they're often not quantitative. And how that would be written into a standard, I think, would be sort of more challenging. My hand down.
Thank you. That's great. Any other comments? Okay. So, Matt and Rasha, shall I come back to you? How would you like to kind of take this conversation forward?
I can comment to say that, you know, some of the things we've been talking about, like a lack of clinical certification for the eye tracker. One of the reasons, or the main reason stated for ISCET's existence, is that by having a presence and a grouping of the clinicians who are using this technology, we can hopefully demonstrate to the manufacturers that there is a need for this. So that this is one thing we can do. And on the point of being able to interpret results from one eye tracker versus another, I think some work needs to be done on reproducibility of the actual eye tracking information as well, which is something I've been hoping to do recently. I'm not aware of much work which is actually directly compared, you know, from one eye tracker to another and shown what are the differences between those. And also, if you do the same test multiple times in different places, you're going to get the same results. Once you know that, I think you can then maybe just say what are the error bars between one eye tracker and another in general, and maybe be more specific about particular pairings of eye trackers. But obviously, if we're developing reference data set at some point, then there will need to be a decision, even though ISCET's trying to avoid tying itself to a particular manufacturer. I think if you're collecting reference data set, that might need to be done on one eye tracker. Or maybe it can be done on a group, I don't know.
John?
Yeah, I wanted to first of all, I agree completely with what Matt just said, and Larry raised an interesting point. Again, I'm not a clinician, but implicit in some of the things he said was that there are certain conditions where a descriptive aspect of the eye movements is sufficient for the diagnosis, or whatever other decision has to be made clinically. But in other cases, it needs to be quantitative. So, I mean, for example, nystagmus is a good example where the waveform itself and the nature of the slow phase can be very, very informative without even looking at the numbers. So it's just, again, this is just to throw out to the clinicians, whether when you're considering certain conditions, that might well be that what I said earlier about the need for a normative database may not be as important when you're actually just looking at a descriptive aspect of the eye movement response, whatever it is. Again, as a non-clinician, I do this with great trepidation.
Andreas?
Hi. Thank you, Gemma, for this good accumulation of information. So what I would, yeah, what is just missing is really a normative database related to setups and eye trackers. And there was this company iBrain that tried to do that in France. iBrain no longer exists, but their idea was we set up experiments for clinical use, and we give the normative data to it and an explanation for the clinician what the results mean. And they try to get it, but it's a real complex thing. A project that might be possible is that to open a database for all people working with eye trackers to give their normative data and to describe the complete setting to the just related to the guidelines for reporting eye tracking studies, and then supplying data for this. And therefore, one could accumulate a lot of normative data for from all over the world. But yeah, to be honest, you have to be very precise when you report your setup and your and everything you're doing there. And yeah, this would be essential, I think.
And you've just kind of made me remember something. I think this is what happens in perimetry. I think there's an open source of perimetry data that the researchers in the perimetry world feed into. I'll have a little look for that, but I think that's what they've done. They've kind of got this open collaboration where people do put their data in, but as you say, you would have to very clearly describe how that was collected to be meaningful to the next person. But I certainly think others have gone down that road of having that collaboration and open sharing of normative data. Matt?
I think, are you referring to Open Perimetry Interface? I've just put a link to that.
I think so.
And I thought it was more, well, yeah, perhaps they do. I mean, it's a great idea, I think, and obviously this is one of the major advantages. If you have a standard at that point, then everyone can start collecting data with similar techniques, and therefore that's where you can start your reference data set from. It would involve a certain amount of coordination, I suppose, in terms of the ethics. I mean, the data would be anonymized, but nevertheless, we need to make sure we have protocols in place for people to be able to actually send that into a repository. But I think that would be a hugely useful thing that ISCET could do once we have standards in place.
If I could just add that kind of would halfway meet Matt's concern about, or the issue he raised about whether or not different eye trackers produce sufficiently similar results. And clearly, if you can agree on certain protocols for producing this kind of open database, even though you use different instruments, you'd be in a position to compare them. So you could actually compare what the main sequence is when you do, following the same protocol, you use an SR, iLink, or you use a Toby or whatever it is, you'd very quickly be able to sort out how dependent we are on the machinery, as opposed to so long as we have a protocol, as long as everybody reports what they did, protocol, how they did the calibration, then it may well be we could be, in some cases, compare like with like in terms of the output of a particular eye movement.
Yeah, I agree, John. I think it's sounding even more like having the standards on how you do the thing is probably the first step in all of this before we then, I mean, sharing data on it has always been something long talked about in nystagmus, but we're all aware we do something slightly different. So I think that would be an amazing end result if we got there. So whether it would be somebody new coming in that could check their data compared to some published norms, or whether it would be analysis and that research output as described, I think that kind of open sharing of data would be a fantastic end goal to get to, but I think what would have to come first is that agreement on protocols. And it could be that there are some very basic established principles that it needs to include X, Y, Z, but then you've got to specify what parameters you've used in your collection of that data, so that there's not just one way, one amplitude of a saccade. Okay. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to comment. I think that it would be of great significance also to determine the type of tracking that was being done. It's not as much as the protocol itself. Like protocol, yeah, we can follow it and all that. But if it's one gaze detector against, let's say, a pupil detector, that'll mislead us and lead to accumulating useless data that is not mergeable and not combinable. When you talk about two different eye trackers that use two different methods of detecting the eye movement. So that would be one of the main, I would say, key points to having something similar, or try and synchronize data amongst users or researchers, is to use the same method in tracking itself, and comparing devices amongst themselves. That's possible, but only if they use the same method, and only if they are like equal in their capabilities, like capturing, for example, 400 or 200 frames per second also might play a role. So that should be taken into consideration also, I would say.
No, I'd say that's one of the things we've discussed previously, is that without trying to tie to any particular form of technology, there will be certain conditions that you might require certain, say temporal frequencies for. If you're interested in latency of saccades, for example, or even the saccade dynamics, that's when you start to need really high frame rates, but you might not need that for certain other conditions or things you're diagnosing. And certainly in some cases, comparison between things like a scleral search coil and a video-based eye tracker, yes, you might expect them to have different results. But if we can define the parameters that need measuring, if you're measuring just a signal and converting it to degrees, in theory, the two should be comparable. But that's what we can learn from this work.
Then we should establish some kind of thresholds beyond which we should not cross in order for that data to be similar and acceptable.
Absolutely, yeah.
Would anybody else like to add any comments or suggestions to the discussion? Larry.
Again, following up on that, right now I only know of one system that's AI-based, the Pupil Labs Neon, but that's liable to spread as AI becomes more popular. And the company explicitly says that it won't cope with abnormal eye movements. So it would be easy to imagine a purchaser who loves the advertisement buys one and then applies it to someone with nystagmus or an INO or something like that. So that's probably not it does log the raw data, but I'll bet most users are never going to look at the raw data. They will look at what the AI tells them. So just for future thought, probably making sure that new systems or actually operate on the data itself and not something generated externally is worth keeping in mind. That will probably be, as it's near midnight here, that's probably my last contribution for the day.
Thank you very much for joining, Larry. Gosh, that's a late evening for you. Do appreciate it.
But I missed the last few meetings. This was at least feasible for a while.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. I just like also to remind everyone that we have all the meetings recorded on the website. Just if anyone would like to refer to any, including of course this one. But we're always happy with people joining anytime. And that was a great contribution, Larry. Thank you.
Can I briefly maybe ask something that may be obvious, but I'm also like on and off in this meeting, so I lose track of what is where. Do we have a common Google Doc or something where we are working on this protocol? Could we put that in the chat? Because I think the global normative data sounds super attractive, and if we could really come up with a short but well thought through protocol, I could imagine that the people all over the world, we could motivate that. Like people could, every time you conduct an eye movement study, you could run the protocol for 5 minutes and then contribute that data to a normative database of some sort. I could imagine that might be, if you can come up with a good set of things to measure and tasks to design.
So I'll respond to that. Yeah, I'm just going to post a link right now to the meeting notes from all of the meetings we've had. Now that is just a list of notes from meetings so far. But when we begin, which we should be doing very soon, the process of defining specific standards, then those will be published. They should be published in peer-reviewed journals as well. But the ongoing work of ISCET, we try to keep everything. The about page on the website is quite informative as well, because if there's any major decisions about goals and so on, that gets updated there. But this is, everyone feeds into this. And so any ideas that are put forward in a meeting will appear on those meeting notes. Yeah, so then the next thing, I know this is one of the things on the agenda for today, was to try to make a decision on what standard to prioritize first and check whether we have the expertise within ISCET currently to actually make that happen. I don't know if we've only got 9 minutes left in this meeting, so there might not be sufficient time to do that today. And especially given that we've had this thing raised of, well, we could look by condition, or maybe we need to look, to organize them by the type of eye movement being assessed. I don't know if people have specific thoughts on a way forward with that, or if we bring that to the next meeting and give people time to think.
Because I kind of asked the question. I don't know if that works for others, but we do sort of a brainstorming kind of thing on a shared document, and I think that we could start by collecting ideas from the room as to what tasks they think are representative of normal eye movements, and there will be a wild amount, but then we need to maybe prioritize that, like 1 or 2, that 3 or whatever, to start from somewhere. I don't think, but I think we need to maybe start by inventorizing what people think is the most generalizable tasks. Perhaps that might actually bring us to what is a normative standard from their perspective. Could be one idea.
In relation to a particular, are you talking in relation, say, for saccades alone, or are you?
I would say the entire eye movement metric space would be interesting. So depending on, like, I think we are interdisciplinary as a group, and I think everybody has a different focus and they might have a different priority. But I would say all eye movement metrics that are relevant in our work, we could try to say what is the normative, what is the general, like if you do not have any anomalies, what does a fixation look like during a task that might be representative of the kinds of work you do? I mean, I do visuospatial cognition, navigational learning, and in my context, I know something of that, and I know something of what deviates from that with, abnormal aging included, and the others might bring other angles. I was wondering if that would be a productive way, or if if the survey already helped you with narrowing it up, but I think not.
I'll just add one more point, which is that there are many things to create standards for potentially. The reason we were suggesting just starting with one thing, and hopefully from the survey we can decide what that is, was that we want to make sure that we do the process of developing the standard properly. So if we just said, hey, look, we've got these 15 different things we want to look at, let's all create subcommittees and work on it together. I think we need to do it on one first, just to learn from the process and make sure we understand how we can all collaboratively feed into that and make sure everyone's heard. Which was why we said, let's just pick one and then go from there. So I agree with you, that there are many aspects that would define normal eye movement function at this point. And maybe it doesn't matter too much, but particularly which one we choose. We now have the information from the survey, but if we pick one, we can just form a subcommittee to work on that, and then that can go in parallel with ISCET's work.
And just a quick reply to regarding the document, we had a prior document before the survey where we all brainstormed and then there was a subcommittee working on it, and now we're discussing the results. But we can do a document if needed, according to if we need more further brainstorming, after this session. But it's kind of that. Whenever we want to take decisions, we prefer to do that in the committee meeting to have everyone deciding. But I'm suggesting something like, do you think that we need to go on, Matt?
I was just going to say that document should still be available. Gemma, do you know where that one is from the prior to?
Yeah.
Did it go on the forum?
We can continue on it, maybe updated with needed.
Yeah,
But
that
it's there.
document should be somewhere. If it's not on the ISCET website, hopefully.
Do you suggest everyone that we would have maybe a follow-up meeting that would be a little bit soon, not so far? And I can host another one for Europe because I think, I mean, this if this time zone, or we can, of course, I think it's Jonathan's. I mean, I'm fine with your decision, but I feel like today we have brainstormed a lot of things, but I don't think that we will even have time to go to the second topic for today. So what do you think, everyone? Like,
I would suggest we continue to rotate the time zones so that everyone gets a say, because the next one would be the Americas, and then it's the Asia, Australasia, and everyone can review these meeting minutes. I know it kind of becomes a bit stilted, and maybe we needed more than an hour today, but I don't think we want to make sure we wrap up all the decisions just in the Europe and Africa time zones.
oh, okay.
Could I just add to that? So the initial kind of ideas document was owned by Matt, but rather than going back to that, I think it would be better for the results of the survey to be summarised more properly in almost like a meeting, like a report or like an output, so that people can look more carefully at the results. And I feel like that should be the next kind of decision. Otherwise, I'm worried that we'll kind of take a step back before we take a step forward. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the lady's name that made a comment about, like collaboratively working on this. I think that's a really good idea, but I think we're aware that this survey process has taken quite a long time. So I think whatever happens, it probably needs to happen more swiftly. So whatever people feel is the most useful thing for the survey, I'm happy to do, because I and the working group can kind of put that together more in document format that people then can add on, because ultimately we need to kind of decide some actions and move things forward.
Yeah,
Ruth, you've got your hand up as well.
Thanks. Yes, just really quickly, Gemma, whether or not the intention is to publish the results of the survey, I think what you've suggested would be really useful to have a summarising document with all the detail there as well, if people wanted to look at it. And you could add into that maybe the feedback that you have at each of the time zone meetings subsequently, so that it effectively becomes a consensus statement. And whether it then goes on to, but that doesn't need to hold, if it does go on for publication, that wouldn't need to hold back the actions coming from it, because it's already received the consensus of the group.
Thanks, Ruth. I think that's probably another thing to add. Do we feel like it would be useful to publish this so that we've got a start point kind of evidenced? But yeah, I like the suggestion of summarising the results and then having feedback from each group. Rasha?
I think that I at least have understood that this would be also published, and we have the ethical committee, like, you got from the university, also, of course, for the survey to run, but also to proceed with it, and it would be also a good contribution to the ISCET itself, to publish that. So, and why not? Like, it's, of course, it will be more effort, but it's worth it, I believe. But back from this point, like, we can like if I can help summarize that we might take some quick decisions today. Like we discussed that whether do we need general guidelines in addition to a specific condition or test-oriented guidelines. And to do that, you raised the question that do we have enough published or current info, for example, to have a resource tab on our website, or no, there is a real need that we as a committee also provide just general guidelines, because also we're kind of doing two things. We are tackling, like we are approaching expertise also, but we also, one of the aims is to help introduce this also to junior doctors and those who are actually might not be juniors but are novice to this to using this in their clinical field. And I think I got that also from the results you presented, because some people did ask about the kind of the tests itself, the eye tracking data, like so I felt like we need to actually we need to approach the whole method from the beginning. Maybe people would like us also to start from the testing, the settings, as we all intend, and then to all the conditions, especially the challenging ones, the nystagmus, and as more conditions we are going to work on, and then how to interpret data also. I think that's also would be interesting, and of course the normative data. That's what I kind of quickly got from the results. But then how to start, like now it's your call to to give an opinion or to vote, or at least for the guideline thing. Yeah.
It might be it's a case for having general guidelines as well as specific guidelines. I should quickly ask Ruth if you've got time to answer. Does ISCET have both specific and general guidelines, or does it not work quite like that?
I guess it doesn't work quite like that. Our tier is that we have standards and we have guidelines, and then we have extended protocols. So if an ERG, an electroretinograph, is a standard, then that's a minimum set of things. But where there's enough consensus on an additional ERG for perhaps a specific condition, then we write an extended protocol for an extension to the principal protocol to cover it that way. But the guidelines are very broad. So we have a guideline that covers stimulus and calibration issues. We have a guideline that covers the procedures. So that's like a clinical guide which tests when.
But of course, electrophysiology, like, because it's that well established, and so there are standards, and so I think general guidelines in this kind of like field would be. I mean, we can kind of correlate what Ruth said to our situation, and I still see that having some general guidelines would be would at least would be acknowledging the results of the survey.
I think our situation is a little different actually to the electrophysiology because everyone's using the same technique but doing different things with it, whereas you're talking about technique by technique standards. So that might be a good case. But the question is then, do we start with the general guidelines, or do we do these specifics and then work back from there? I don't know.
Now I don't know if we have enough like people and work tasks that we would act in parallel in a way in like two committees, because the general would need first someone also with research backgrounds in addition to the clinical, that we would see already the existing what we have, and then we see the amount that we need to build on it, I think. I don't know, like if we act in parallel, of course we'd save time, but it's a question like how many people, and of course they can be overlapping people in every. I don't know. If that sounds a good idea.
Guess we need to maybe summarize what we've discussed today and then pass that over to the Americas meeting next, and hopefully have that later.
Well, I quite like the suggestion of having kind of a summary of the survey and then a summary of the discussion that we've had in this meeting, and then trying to reach consensus from everybody about the direction. I've obviously kind of got my views on where it should probably go, but as highlighted by others, this is a collaborative effort. So I'm very happy to take as an action that the working group will try and document the results in a kind of a better format than a quick PowerPoint presentation. So yeah, I think if that's an action, happy to do that, and then I can try and summarize the discussion from this group at the end of that, and take it forward to the next ISCET meeting.
And could we, like, you also suggested having a document like for those who won't be able to attend the next meeting due to different zones, and if they want to contribute, not only listening to the recording, could we have like a circulating document so that everyone would, I mean, I want to continue also with the same people continuing.
So we do have the forum on the website now, which we didn't have previously. I don't think many people have yet signed up to that, but that is one place where we can continue discussions forever. There is the mailing list, but that goes to everyone every time. So I think some people were more reticent to post because it means everyone receives an email. But the forum, we could maybe set up a specific forum to discuss this.
Okay, so and we'll put the link with maybe an email with the feedback or on the website.
Yeah.
We will.
If we set up a specific forum place, then we can have a discussion there.
Okay. Can I quickly ask Andreas if he's still here about what he mentioned about the iBrain company, because you mentioned that they already had some work on the normative data and no longer there. So can we kind of reach that and maybe build on it in a way if they already took steps? If that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, there is a successor company called Zuricock in France, and they still sell the product, but meanwhile the eye tracker looks a little bit different from that one that I have in my lab. Maria Pucci in France also uses this system, and they did it, and they had something like an expert database in the background, and David Z was one of the instructors for this data, for this expert knowledge that was accumulated there. But I don't know how what kind of shape the system is right now and how they're doing it. So I have no contracts with this company or so.
Thank you. So if we are happy with this today, we will, I thank everyone for your valuable opinions, and we will get to brainstorm more maybe with our friends in the US zone. And meanwhile, we'll continue on the forum. So I'm encouraging everyone to please like maybe skip 1 or 2 days, and then we should be having a forum with the name for the survey, or maybe like a couple of days, and continue from here.
Great. Thank you, Rasha.
Thank you, everyone.